top story. The alleged Century City serial killer and rapist will be back in the court today. The suspect was arrested in January after 6 naked bodies were discovered lying face down with their hands tied behind their backs in a field next to the Century City train station in Cape Town. Now, to give us the latest, we are joined from Cape Town by our reporter, Vanessa Poonah. Very good morning to you, Vanessa.
Good morning to you, Eben.
Vanessa, this morning the suspect will be appearing there. Just tell us, are there any community or family members of victims that you've seen attending proceedings?
Yeah, but no, there's no sign of any community members or even families of the victims here at the Goodwood Magistrates Court this morning. I have with me a guest who is the Deputy Chairperson of the Kensignton Policing Community Forum, who will speak to us about just the feeling of the Kensignton community at this stage. I can, however, Eben, confirm with you that as early as this morning, police in the Western Cape have confirmed that the suspect, the 30-year-old suspect who initially was charged with 2 charges of murder, rape and robbery, will now also today be charged with 5 further charges. That is 2 of murder as well as 1 of rape and 1 of kidnapping. Now, to speak to us about just the general sense from the community is Mr. Mogamat Nordien, who is the Deputy Chairperson of the Kensignton Community Policing Forum. Good morning to you, Mr. Nordien. Just in terms of the feeling of the Kensignton community and surrounds following the discoveries of the bodies there late last year.
Good morning, Vanessa, and good morning to the viewers. Yes, it came to great concern to the community of Kensignton, as Kensignton is not known, for very, severe violence and this type of killing fields. So it was a concern. The people were up in arms, but we're having a great and very vibrant CPF, working very close to the police, and we could take things under control where the community is concerned, as neighborhood watches were formed, street committees were formed, and they could assist then, of calming the people, putting things in perspective with the crime and the Century City or 12th Avenue as a route to go to Century City.
Now, you spoke to me earlier about the measures that have been put in place by various street committees, etc. Can you just elaborate on this and also tell us if it's going ahead and what are the long-term plans?
Yes, Vanessa. Acre Road Street Committee has been formed immediately after the killings in December, and they do patrolling in the evenings during people going through to coming from Century City home, and in the mornings as well. They are still going on, and they are reaping in great successes because there were a few attempted robberies. So in the presence, because they were very violent, they were in the area, it was stopped immediately. So that has brought great successes in that area.
And then also you spoke about the communication and the cooperation between the community as well as the police. This is ongoing.
This is going on, and it brought in, like I said, great successes. Kensington Street Committee has been formed. This Frankton North neighborhood watch has been formed. Another one is being formed now in 10th Avenue. So yes, this is what the people want. And as I make just reference, to the apartheid system that we had, during that time we had one common enemy, and that was the apartheid regime. Today we also have another common enemy, and that is crime. And people should really, form street committees in the area because it was successful at that time prior to 1994. So it can be successful again now.
Thank you very much. That's Mr. Nordien, Deputy Chairperson of the Kensignton Community Policing Forum, speaking to us about the fears and the feelings of the Kensignton community following the discoveries of those bodies as late as December last year. Very important to note, though, even if I can just say, this morning speaking to police, they will still not be roped in on speculation that this is indeed the work of a serial killer. At this point, the police say the matter is before the courts, but could confirm that the additional 5 charges, including 2 of murder, will be brought against the suspect when he appears in court this morning.
Thank you very much, Vanessa. Now, coincidentally, the suspected University of Venda serial killer, who's been linked to 4 murders, rape and an assault, will also appear in the Thohoyandou Magistrates Court in Limpopo this morning. The 24-year-old student has been charged on 16 counts. That's 4 of murder, 1 of attempted murder, 5 of rape, 3 of aggravated robbery, and 3 further charges of kidnapping around the tertiary institution. Now, joining us today to shed some light on the workings of South African serial killers is Brigadier Gerard Labuskaghni, who's the head of the police's investigative psychology section. Very good morning to you, Brigadier. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you.
Incidentally, we have 2 serial killers in court, or suspected serial killers before the courts today. We sometimes seem to think that this kind of thing only happens in the movies that come out of America, but it's a very real scenario that plays out in South Africa now. Are we seeing a spike in this? Can you maybe just paint the sort of background to these kind of serial killers that we see in South Africa?
Yeah, thanks, Eben. We probably, on average, in a year would identify 5 new murder series. And that's primarily thanks nowadays to our DNA database that we have, which automatically links cases where similar DNA is found. So that's really led to a spike in our identification of murder, but more specifically serial rape series. But again, that does not mean there's more happening. It's just our abilities to identify them are far more improved thanks to technology such as DNA, and also the training that we give to detectives and crime scene people on how to identify these cases by means of modus operandi.
These 2 cases before the court, the one in Cape Town, the police are still not prepared to say that it is a serial killer. You work with the psychology section within the police. From your experience, how do you view the kind of modus operandi that we've seen, specifically with the Century City killings, hands tied behind the backs, shallow graves, naked bodies and so forth?
Well, what we often see in our serial murders, and that's also throughout the world, is that they like to group their crime scenes in a particular area. So they'll often meet their victims in one particular area and then transport them usually by foot to another area that they've pre-sought out beforehand, where they will actually kill the victims. So you often do find almost like a graveyard of victims. Strangulations are usually the most common method, and are interesting in Cape Town. They seem to prefer using ligatures to tie up victims. So it's quite interesting.
We have the stereotypes that I suppose is born out of the movies, that serial killers are normally middle-aged white males with an axe to grind against the world. That's not the case, is it?
Yeah, a lot of our understanding of serial murder is based on research that's done in the United States. So of course that's not going to be applicable in South Africa and China. So according to our population demographics, our serial murderers in terms of their race fits very much the demographic profile of the country. But they're not the evil geniuses that you see on TV. They make mistakes not because they want to be caught, but because they often don't understand forensic techniques that are available to the police. So they have an average level of intelligence. Usually 60% of them are actually involved in romantic relationships, so they're not these isolated loners that people often get this misperception from television, etc.
The Jeffrey Dahmer picture that we always get. I want to talk about the community. We've seen how the Kensignton Community Police Forum talk about the effect that it's had on the community. In general, when 6 bodies are discovered in your community, what's the kind of psychological effect that it has on that community?
It has almost an overwhelming effect on the community because nobody knows who the person could be. And typically serial murderers are people who really just fit into society quite normally. They don't live a criminal lifestyle. It'd be very easy if they were robbing, stealing, housebreaking, etc., and committing murders. But these are people who react with you very normally. They interact, they're in relationships, they have jobs. They're not living that criminal lifestyle. So that's why I think also there's this compounded fear that it could be literally your neighbor and you wouldn't know it.
Now, you believe that South African serial killers operate somewhat differently from those in the rest of the world. How and why is that?
I think the primary reason is actually socioeconomic. Most of our serial murderers are doing odd jobs or piece jobs. They're not full-time employed, which means they don't have a vehicle. Now they have to alter their modus operandi. They cannot pick up a victim with a vehicle, lure them take them to a different place, kill them, and drop their bodies off somewhere else. So they have to approach their victims on foot. Now, how do you convince someone to come with you to the place you want to murder them? You have to sell them a story.
Yeah.
And usually that's going to be offering employment. And because on the other side of it, we have so many unemployed people, they are desperate for jobs. So 1 in 9, 1 in 10 women will probably go with a complete stranger if that job offer sounds very believable and lucrative. And they will literally from that point walk with that stranger, usually take a shortcut through the veldt where they commit their murders.
What are some of the other myths or myth-busting demographics about serial murderers and their victims here in South Africa?
Well, as I said, this myth that there are these sort of isolated loners. As I said, 60% are in romantic relationships, have children often. They have an average level of intelligence based on the ones that we've tested. As I said, they're not driving around. They're not necessarily even these flashy, convincible people. They just are able to sell a story to desperate victims that will then go with them.
Will you ever be able, as an individual, to see telltale signs if someone close to you is a serial killer or potential?
You know, in the past they used to talk about the McDonald triad, which is fire setting, bedwetting, and cruelty to animals. And if you see that pattern of behavior, you're going to have someone develop into a serial murderer. Unfortunately, there's not been a proper link between that. Of course, if you do have that in any child, that's a warning, concerning sign on its own, but that isn't the pathway to leading to become a serial murderer. So I don't think we'll ever really be able to predict who's going to become one, and we won't ever, based on personality or interaction, really just discern if a person is a serial murderer or is going to become one at a later stage.
Brigadier, I thank you for coming in today. I know it's a difficult subject for you guys to talk about and to give us insight, because all these investigations are constantly ongoing. So thank you for coming in today and shedding some light on something that's very concerning for all of us here in South Africa.
Thank you.
Thank you for joining us. That's Brigadier Gerard Labuschagne, who's the head of the police's investigative psychology unit. He's giving us a little insight into how serial killers operate in this country and the fact that, well, they're well different than from those in the rest of the world. But